You don't understand. You've got me confused with someone who's not afraid of heights.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Take 5. Welcome back to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My guest today is Paula Boggs. Paula is a musician, but with a very interesting journey that we're going to talk about. Paula, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So Paula and I have a shared work history. We were both worked at Starbucks Coffee back 20 years ago or so. Not that we knew each other, but we might have been in the same coffee room on one of the floors. Who knows? I mean, I always enjoyed working there because I was always impressed. Like, there's coffee everywhere. This is great.
Everywhere.
Paula, let's start this. You now have the Paula Boggs band, but there's a long journey before we got to that point. So how about sharing some of that with our audience so that we can kind of build the backstory to what you're doing today?
Sure, Scott. And, you'll have to guide me on, how far and how much you want. But let's frame it this way to kick it off. I'm someone who is very lucky, and part of being very lucky is how it all started for me. I'm the child of educators, and my family goes back centuries in this country. I think we can record as early as the late 1700s.
Oh, wow.
As enslaved people here. Okay. And from a very early age, and this is a theme that, continues through my life to today, it was hard to put my experience in a box because even as a little kid, I was living in the segregated South as a Black Roman Catholic. Okay, so Catholics are a minority in the South, at least they were. Black Catholics were, and to this day, are a minority of African Americans. And so that was kind of the framing of that for me as the child of educators. My dad was a biology professor at Virginia State, which is an historically Black college. And that was basically how I rolled. I attended the only integrated school in Petersburg. The Catholic school was the only integrated school. And that was kind of my vibe until my folks split up. And that led to my mom taking me and her 3 other kids out of the segregated South to Europe. And so for me, from grades 8 through 12, I lived in Germany and Italy, and those experiences really imprinted deeply the person I became. I returned to the United States, went to college, joined the Army, became a lawyer. And, over the course of a generation, that was pretty much my gig until it wasn't. As you know, I left Starbucks about a decade ago. And since then, I've been a creator, whether that is in music or speaking or some other way touching the creative arts. So that's you can move from there as you wish. But throughout all of that, I think it's important for your listeners to know, music was either a central player, or it was, in a latency period before it reemerged. But I believe it never left.
Growing up, I'll ask this question. So pre-Europe, was music prevalent in the household?
It was there. It was present.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I would use the word prevalent. And the reason I say that is there was music, I remember Otis Redding and the Temptations and, stuff like that. That's what I was hearing in my household.
Okay.
Not every day, but we had those records, those LPs and 45s. I was attending both Catholic church, and my mom wasn't Catholic. She was African Methodist Episcopal. So I had this diversity of church music experiences. One Sunday I might be at the Catholic church and, listening to, the Kyrie and the incense and the genuflections, and, was a kid as folk music emerged as an art form in the Catholic church. But then the next week I'd be at Oak Street AME Zion Church, where there was gospel. And so both of those influences, I believe, remain in, the music I write to this day.
How about when you moved to Europe? How was your high school years of Europe? How was the music scene? Were you listening to different stuff when you were in Europe? Were you exposed to things there that that influenced you?
Totally. I mean, it was almost night and day in some respects. There were forms of music I had never heard before that became, part of my music palette. An example of that is jazz. I had never really been exposed to jazz before moving to Europe. But my mom was a teacher in the Department of Defense school system. So the children she taught were the children of military personnel and civilians stationed there. And with that community, we came to know expat American musicians. And for the most part, they were either jazz musicians or classical musicians. And so for the first time in my life, I was actually hanging out with jazz musicians and classical musicians. I had heard some, Baroque classical music in the Catholic Church, but the diversity of classical music I was exposed to in Europe was something quite magnificent for me. And, we were, during that 5-year period, I was a teen in Europe. Not only were we in Germany, and in Germany in the 70s, there was the emergence of what we now know as EDM music. So you had, these bands like Kraftwerk who, were emerging in Germany back then when I was a teen. And so, so that music, there was no exposure to music like that for me when I lived in, segregated Petersburg, Virginia. And
probably not.
And then we moved to Italy. And so there was, opera and whatnot that was certainly not part of my experience before we got to Europe. So yes, in addition to being exposed to, a diversity of people. I mean, I had my first, sleepovers with white girls in Europe. I was being exposed to just this amazing palette of diverse music.
Then you came back to the States for college. Where did you go to college at?
I went to Johns Hopkins University on an ROTC scholarship. So that's the only way I would have been able to afford Johns Hopkins. And it was, now I know this, it was absolutely the best place for someone like me. And the reason for that is Hopkins prides itself on exploration.
Okay.
And whether that's scientific exploration or, anything else. Meaning, if you could sell it, they'd give you credit for it. And for someone like me, that was perfect because that's what I've been doing my entire life.
Okay. From there you went, and how many years were you in the Army?
All told, I was in the Army for 7 years, but 3 of those were while I was in law school. So 4 years active duty Army. Okay.
I'm on your website and I'm reading your bio here, and so I have 2 questions about your military career that you can help me out with here.
Sure.
Regular officer in the United States Army, earned Army Airborne Wings. Does that mean you jumped out of airplanes as a lawyer?
Yes, it does.
Did you like carry a briefcase when you jumped out, or I mean, what? Why? Explain this to me, because I didn't grow up in a military family, nor. So if you were going to law school to be an attorney, why were you jumping out of airplanes? I mean, I'd ask anybody that question. Why are you jumping out of airplanes? Seems like a crazy thing to, period, no matter what you're doing. But why were you, was that optional? Did you want to? Was it required?
It's actually a really cool story in many respects. I went to airborne school while still an Army ROTC cadet. So I was not yet a commissioned officer. I was still in college. And so what I tell people is I was a very serious student at Hopkins, but I wasn't a very serious cadet. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I was on scholarship there, but it was sort of like, for those who remember Gomer Pyle, it was sort of, an African-American female version of Gomer Pyle. So one day, my professor of military science, he is just so exasperated with me because I am just not serious. He literally takes me by my shoulders and he's shaking me and he says, "You are not serious." He says, "You're about to enter this man's army." That's how he put it. Mm-hmm. This man, and you need an edge. You need to go to airborne school. And literally, Scott, I went, "Whoa, no, sir, you don't understand. You've got me confused with someone who's not afraid of heights." And he said, "No, you. I'm talking to you. And you can do this." And I was like, "Sir, I can't do this." And he said, "Yes, you can." He said, "Here's all you have to do. They're going to yell at you. They're going to scream at you. They're going to make you do a ton of push-ups. They're going to make you feel awful. But just remember, it's all designed so that when they say jump, you will jump and you will land safely." Now, I'm not going to say I believed him right out of the
Okay.
block, Scott, because I didn't. But there was something about him having faith in me in a way I clearly did not have in myself that led me to say yes. And, and he worked with me. He said, look, you're an athlete. And I was. I ran cross country and track at Hopkins. So I was in shape. And he was right. I learned how to get my mind in a place where I could navigate fear and get to the other side of it. Okay. Now, I'm still afraid of heights. But I also earned my airborne wings. And what that taught me, whether it's leaving Starbucks to become a musician, or something else, that, fear can be healthy. Mm-hmm. Fear can protect you, but fear can also cripple you if you let it. And so it gave me a tool set, if you will, going to airborne school that has served me well ever since, because, as life comes to any of us, there's hard stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff that can make any of us fearful. I'm not immune to that. But because I had that experience as a young person, and it was so imprinting for me, it has served as a guidepost for me.
The other part of this military thing says, and a congressional appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy, among America's first women to do so. What is a congressional appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy?
Yeah,
did you attend Annapolis?
I ended up not going. I ended up going to Hopkins and taking my Army ROTC scholarship instead.
Okay.
But, setting the stage a little bit for your listeners, the military academies were barred to women. Okay. Women were not allowed to attend the academies until 1976. And
That's
so
right.
I was in high school when that happened, and I was living on a military installation, right, in Europe. Okay. So for a lot of kids, mostly the guys, but if you were, if you had good grades and you were an athlete, it was almost expected that you were going to at least apply to one of the military academies. That was, our environment. So when the academies opened their doors to women, there were those of us who were athletes and had good grades, and that became open to us as well. Now, to get into any of the academies, whether it's Annapolis or West Point or the Air Force Academy, doesn't matter, Coast Guard Academy, you can only be accepted. You can only be in the pool of people who can potentially be accepted if you've got a recommendation from the President of the United States, from a U.S. Senator, or from a member of Congress. You must have a recommendation to even be put in the pool. Okay. So I'm in Europe. I told you I lived in the segregated South, and this is the best part of this story. So my congressman from Virginia, which was the last place we lived, was an avowed segregationist. Okay. This dude did not believe in the equality of Black people and white people. He just did not. Okay. And was a proponent of a system that kept Blacks and whites apart. But he had no clue who I was. I was this kid in Europe.
Okay.
And so the most beautiful part of my congressional appointment is that I received it from an avowed segregationist.
That's beautiful, actually. That's okay. Wow. Then you went to Berkeley for law school?
Yes. Which the best part of that, Scott, was not so much the law school part of it. The best part of the next step in my life journey being Berkeley was Berkeley. You know,
so I
because
have to ask,
it was just.
I'm going to interrupt you. I got to ask this question.
Yes.
So you went to Berkeley.
Yes.
Did you ever go see the Grateful Dead?
I've seen the Grateful Dead, but not in Berkeley.
Okay.
I saw the Grateful Dead in Portland, Maine.
Oh, that okay. Sorry, I had to interrupt because I'm like thinking. Yeah. Anyway, all right. Sorry to interrupt you. So you grew up in segregation. You went to Europe. You went to Johns Hopkins, and then you end up in Berkeley. You're really. That's quite the diverse path, location-wise.
Yeah, it is, and you know it informs who I am.
I want to talk your music, so we're going to cut short your career, and I'm not doing you justice, but you help me out. What? How do I want to ask? This is I warned you this, they're not scripted. So, but you have served on a number of boards. You've done a number of appointments. There's a photograph here with you and a president, Barack Obama. Fender Music. I'm just scrolling here. KEXP. You were at Dell Computers. I'm leaving out far more than I'm covering and I'm just in the. I'm going to give you a critique. The font is awfully small on your website. It's hard to read all these things. It's so dense. And I'm kidding, but it's wow. There is so much going on here. Let's go back to Starbucks. You're the chief counsel for the corporation. You were there for 10 years.
I sure was.
And I think we were discussing this part of it before we actually recorded. Starbucks grew a lot during those 10 years and spread out across the globe, if you will. And you were overseeing the legal teams and all that. Somehow, somewhere, there's this, you mentioned how you're going to tell Howard Schultz that thank you. And I appreciate my time here, but I'm going to go and play music.
That's right.
So how was that conversation? I mean, because I got to imagine that's a pretty unique way to resign from a very prominent corporate position. How did Mr. Schultz take this?
You know, it's a beautiful story, Scott, because being at Starbucks, and I think having, worked there yourself, what I'm about to say may resonate with you. I don't even know if I would have returned to music working at another company.
Wow.
I think there's a direct connection between, being at Starbucks wasn't the primary trigger that brought me back to music, but I think being in that petri dish, being in a community of people who, for so many of them, Starbucks was the one corporation they could work for. There's an an overwhelming number of people who are creative people who find their way to Starbucks in the stores, all the way up, right? Mm-hmm. And so as I was returning to music inch by inch in, say, that 2005, 2006 time frame, I had a lot of support for that journey. My team was kind of rooting for me, as were my peers. And Howard's predecessor, Jim Donald, was just a big fan. He was a big fan of me exploring that side of me, And so by the time Howard came back as CEO, this train was moving, and so he had, he bore witness to all of this. So, it wasn't this lightning bolt out of the blue in that sense. Having said that, though, I rehearsed that conversation for several months with my spouse.
Okay.
She was playing Howard because I knew I only had one shot, and it had to be good, and it had to be a message that made it clear what it was. It had nothing to do with Starbucks. It had nothing to do with him. Mm-hmm. And I had to convey that somehow, that this was all about me. Not only was I going to leave Starbucks, I was going to leave law. It wasn't like I was leaving Starbucks to go someplace else. Right. In corporate America. I wasn't. This was it. Okay. Starbucks was going to be the pinnacle of that chapter. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I told him. I told him that, I felt blessed to have had law and business be such a central part of my being for these many years, but I was done. And while I was still young enough to do this thing, I was going to do this thing. And he took it really well. And I think part of it is we were having this conversation only a couple months after Steve Jobs died.
Oh.
And so I think, Steve Jobs dying, and I think Howard saw Steve Jobs as a peer. They were around the same age and all of that. So this notion of none of us knows how much time we have on this earth. We need to spend it the way we need to spend it. Mm-hmm. I think that was a message he was very ready to receive because of all of that. So yeah, it was a good conversation, and the company celebrated my ending of that chapter at its 2012 annual meeting. It was a really cool thing.
I'm glad to hear that it was well received, and I believe it would be well received. I mean, yeah. I believe, but it's not like your position was easily filled. In other words, it's not like, hey, can somebody take my shift on Friday and make coffee? It wasn't. It's a little more complex than that. So we're gonna just grind the gears, because we're gonna shift away. Now that was kind of your corporate chapters.
Yes.
And let's talk the Paula Boggs band. But before we start that, you said something, and I got to go back to it. You saw the Grateful Dead in Portland, Maine. I've never talked to somebody that saw the Dead in Portland, Maine. How was that?
It was amazing. So, you know, I got to explain a little bit how I got to Portland, Maine. So
Okay.
I was in Berkeley. Yeah, I was a law student at Berkeley, and you know, apropos of, you know, sort of how I'm wired, I learned about this internship possibility in Portland, Maine, while I was in Berkeley, California. And so I applied for it because, you know, the theory being, when else am I going to live in Portland, Maine? or
Seems reasonable.
Northern New England, for that matter. Right. And so I moved, you know, for a semester, I moved, you know, 3,000 miles from Berkeley, California to Portland, Maine. And then after I graduated from law school, before I started work, I spent part of my summer, that next summer, in Portland. And I saw the Grateful Dead. It was an experience I will never forget. I've never seen so much tie-dye in my life, Scott. And as you might imagine, there was ample weed.
Yes, that's
ample weed. I also saw Neil Young in Portland. Those were the two, you know, iconic music acts I saw in Portland, Maine. And the most interesting thing about Neil Young, at least for me, was Neil Young was playing this sort of north of Crazy Horse kind of, you know, super electronic stuff. And the crowd started booing. Okay. I mean, you know, sort of like a la Bob Dylan pulling out his electric guitar thing at Newport. And Neil Young leaves the stage. He literally left the stage, and it's like, is he coming back? Is he, you know, what's going on? So he comes back out after, I don't know, 15 minutes. I mean, it was a while. And the first song he plays is Comes the Time. As in other words, get over yourselves. You know, I'm going to play what I want to play.
Wow. Is that the only time you saw the Grateful Dead? Was in Portland?
That's the only time.
So did you experience the parking lot scene at a Dead show? You know,
I don't know if what you're referring to is what I saw, but the only thing I can compare it to, my sister was a cheerleader for Notre Dame.
Okay.
And I went to a football game, and they have these, what they call subway domers. People come from all over the place, some of them never having attended Notre Dame, and they have like these tailgate things. And it's like a cultural event, right? And it felt similarly. I mean, that's the only other thing I can, only with more tie-dye and more weed.
more tie-dye and more weed. I just remember, I've seen the Grateful Dead a lot, but the parking lot, you know, what's always amazed me is the entrepreneurial endeavors that people would take to stay unemployed and follow the Dead, like selling burritos heated on the manifolds of their Volkswagen buses, and any manner of, you know, you could buy tie-dye, any manner of tie-dye or any manner of all sorts of things. It was just the circus outside of the show that was in some ways more entertaining than the show. It was just the creativity people exhibited was fascinating to me. So maybe someday there'll be, you know, parking lot shows for your band. I don't know.
we can only aspire, right? You know, dream big, right?
There you go. So when you left Starbucks, how did your band come about? Let's talk the origin story of the band. How did you meet some of the players, and how did you execute that initial vision?
Yeah, so I came back to music, or at least I think of it as my return to music. Happened in 2005 in the wake of my sister-in-law being killed in a car crash, and my spouse persuading me to pick up my guitar again as a way to grieve.
Okay.
Within a short period of time, I learned about, and my spouse persuaded me to do it. I took a course, 1 year songwriter certificate course through the University of Washington's evening program, continuing education program. And I loved it. You know, I auditioned for it. It was a year. I was in a community of songwriters for the first time in my life, really. At the end of that, so we're in 2006 by then, one of my teachers, we had a recital, and at the end of it, she says, you know, Paula, I really think you've got something here with your songwriting, and what a shame it would be if you didn't keep going. Now, I didn't know what keep going meant. I had no clue what that meant. I'm Starbucks general counsel, top lawyer. I'm working insane hours, et cetera, et cetera. But I decided that it could mean, and what I made it mean was at the beginning of 2007, I did one open mic a month.
Okay.
And I thought I can do that. I can do one open mic a month, which I did. And on that journey, I met two musicians who continue to be part of Paula Boggs' band. Tor Diedrichson, I actually met through MySpace when it was a thing, realizing he was a Seattle musician. He's a percussionist, and he's amazing. So we've been playing, for 14, 15 years together. And then Mark Shinnon, I actually, who plays guitar and banjo in the band, we actually met in Honolulu. We were both there, but we're both from Seattle. And so, Tor and Mark and I and a couple other guys, became Paula Boggs' band. We had our first gig at the Triple Door Musicarium in January of 2008. And the only reason they gave us a shot was because of Tor. Tor Diedrichson plays with a number of bands and was a known quantity to the Triple Door. And so he vouched for us and basically said, these guys are good. I play with them, give them a shot. And that's how we got it. It was no more, complicated than that. They liked Tor. That's why we got the shot. Okay. They liked Tor. And that's how it all began. And, by the next year, we were recording a first album, which we released.
Where did you record your first album at?
We met a guy. I met a guy through, actually my spouse found him on Craigslist, named Matthew Brown, who turned out to be just perfect for us because Matt is so good. And I mean, he has a point of view, but he's also laid back, right? And approaches recording in a sort of a partnership mindset, which worked really well for us. And there was never a moment where he was telling us, Scott, well, that's stupid. I mean, I'm someone who, I've never done this before, this is the first time. And I really, appreciate that, about Matt. And so, he produced it, he engineered it. And, because of that, we were off to the races with, our first album, Buddha State of Mind.
All right. And did you self-publish that? Was that on a label, or did you self-publish it?
I self-published it, and
Okay.
we've never had label support for any of our albums, and it's something we certainly aspire to, though. The whole landscape for music in 2022 is very different than in 2010. I think, there are many musicians out there who are less needy for label support. And, one of the creative upsides to not having label support, if you can do it, is maintaining ownership of your music.
Well, and when you think about how far the advances in technology, also for like recording purposes, your phone. I'm gonna make a guess that you have an iPhone. Just a guess.
Yeah.
And on your iPhone, GarageBand is a remarkably powerful little thing that sits there on your phone. I mean,
absolutely.
20 years ago, if I would have suggested that to somebody, they'd have looked at me like I was from outer space. And now these devices that we have are just remarkably powerful for a creative person, no matter whether you're a musician, a photographer, anything. They're amazing devices. So you released the first album.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to shift this up. I'm going to ask you some questions I'd love to ask musicians.
Yeah.
As a performer, Washington State only, please, because we are the Exploring Washington State podcast.
Yeah.
Your favorite venue that you performed at as a performer has been what?
Oh my God. It has to be the Triple Door main stage. Okay. And we were just there last week.
So why do you say the Triple Door?
The setting is intimate. So, I think the Triple Door's capacity, it may be 250, but it may be less. It's somewhere in that 200 to 250. So there's an intimacy about that venue that is furthered by, people can opt to eat there, right? Mm-hmm. And it's configured in this almost dinner club style that I think further fuels the intimacy of that place. Coupled with that, the acoustics are off the chart. Just the most amazing acoustics in the Triple Door. Coupled with that, the lighting is amazing. In fact, we had we hired a photographer to shoot our show. And when we told her it was the Triple Door, she was like, "Oh, I love that place." As a photographer, it's just an amazing venue for a photographer because the lighting is just off the hook. Okay. And then I guess the last thing, the stage is great. Everything is great. The how they treat musicians, the green room in the back, they feed their musicians before the show. And the food is amazing. And then finally the people are just nice. Okay. We've never met a jerk at the Triple Door. They just, the wait staff, the audio guy or gal, everybody's just nice. They're very professional. They're very nice. So yeah, the Triple Door main stage.
Flip the question around now. Your favorite place to see music performed at when you're in the audience?
Well, I think it's the Triple Door. Well, it's a toss-up. It's we're not a jazz band, so we don't play there. But as a listener, I love Jazz Alley.
Okay.
for many of the same reasons.
Right.
I also love Benaroya Hall and Macaw, and have seen some amazing non-classical music performances. I've seen classical music performances in each place, but I've seen amazing non-classical music performances. For example, I'm seeing Eddie Vedder at Benaroya Hall tonight, and I know it's going to be amazing, acoustically excellent. It's just an amazing venue.
If your schedule's got conflict, I'd be happy to drive over from Wenatchee and take those tickets off your hand and go to the show for each night. Just
it's
putting that out there.
Trying
to be helpful. Trying to be helpful. Just
it's going to be epic.
Yeah, it's a beautiful venue. All right. So your first show was at the Triple Door. I mean, honestly, I don't know where to go from that. That one, you've stumped me. That's a pretty impressive place to play the first show. So you released your first album.
Yes.
You have a second album released. So let's talk about that process.
Yeah. So it wasn't a straight line. To be perfectly honest about it. So, we released Buddha State of Mind, our first album, in 2010. And by 2013, we had enough material, for a second album. And we tried our hand at, recording it. But it just wasn't right, Scott. It didn't hang. We weren't clear enough about what this music should be. And so we essentially started again in 2014 with a different producer. And this time we worked with Trina Shoemaker, who lives in Mobile, or outside of Mobile, Alabama, but who's worked with a number of Northwest artists. And she was very familiar with Bear Creek, which was where we wanted to record. So Trina actually came up. She had worked with Brandy Carlisle and others in the Pacific Northwest. She knew the studio, Bear Creek, really well. We wanted to be at Bear Creek because we wanted that vibe. We wanted that. We thought that being, in that farm-like setting, that barn-like setting, would be really good for the music we hoped to create. Okay. And to work with Trina. And so we did, and that ended up being Carnival of Miracles, our second album. We released it in 2015, and then we came back with Trina a year after releasing it in 2016, and with Trina we recorded our third studio album, Elixir, the Soulgrass Sessions. And that was, we wrote on that for a couple years. The pandemic intervened, but it didn't frustrate my ability to write. In fact, in some ways it fueled it. And so the songs on this latest album, Janice, were all either written or reimagined during COVID.
Okay. So the new album, well, actually, before we go there. So I was, like I told you before, I was listening to some of your music today before we hopped on this. And I'm not sure how I have to look at my phone while I do this, so I got to make sure I get the right thing here. And my phone is on. Okay. So explain to me Goo Goo Dolls? I'll be honest with you. I stumbled across that on Facebook.
Happy to. I'm
and I
happy
thought,
to
I'm like, are they covering Goo Goo Dolls? That just. And so I listened to the song. I'm like, no, not covering the Goo Goo Dolls. There's got to be a story here.
There is a story. So
okay,
I was surfing YouTube as I do from time to time, and I came upon this video of the Goo Goo Dolls doing, their perhaps their most famous song, Iris, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I was, my response was sort of, come on, because it was, you have Johnny Resnick, and he's kind of like looking or trying to look sexy, and he's like, the wind is blowing through his hair, and you've got the acoustic guitar, and then this crescendo thing, and yada yada. And then I looked at a couple other of their songs, and it was kind of the same formula. Okay, so it would start with Johnny and the acoustic guitar and him looking sexy and the wind blowing in his hair, and and then the swelling of the drums, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? So I wrote Goo Goo Dolls as a tongue-in-cheek response to that experience.
And the version, I'm glad I asked that. The version I listened to was live from the Spanish Ballroom there.
Yes.
So how did you enjoy playing the Spanish Ballroom?
We really like the Spanish Ballroom. The challenge, and a lot of musicians are facing this challenge in the era of COVID. Is you first of all, you've got to get a venue that's open, right? Mm-hmm. And that, is, reopened for business. And then you've got to kind of persuade fans to show up, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are not there. I mean, mm-hmm. they're fearful. And so, we talked to the Spanish Ballroom about this, and they said, your experience is not unique. A lot of bands have been facing the same thing, but we didn't have a lot of people in the house. I mean, it was not that well attended, but mm-hmm. our ace in the hole for the Spanish Ballroom show was, it too has, not only does it have great lighting, but it has great acoustics. Mm-hmm. And the sound engineer that night they'd hired was outstanding. He was totally outstanding. And so when we heard, and we didn't know that was going to be the case, but we had asked him to record our show. And when we heard even his rough mix of it, we're like, oh my God, we performed the show really well. And, there's some opportunity here for, a live single or two. Mm-hmm. So I'm really grateful we got that gig, because we didn't make a lot of money. There weren't a lot of people there, but the people who were there loved the show. And we were able to feed off that. I mean, you can feel it in the music that we're feeding mm-hmm. off a crowd, even though it's a small crowd. There's engagement there. There's energy there, which, right. Is a hallmark of the best shows, no matter if there's one person in the audience or 1,000 plus, you're just, right. When you feel it, you feel it. And we were feeling it that night. And the recording engineer was first rate. And so that's how all that came together. we've had this one guy, Nick Denke, who has mixed live performances for us for over a decade. And when he heard that Spanish ballroom mix, he said, Paula, first of all, the band has never sounded better. And two, this drummer you have and this bass player you have, they're the best you've ever had for Paula Boggs band. He said, it makes my job so much easier. So, you know, we're just so fortunate to have Jake Evans on drums and Alex Deering on bass. They're both second generation professional musicians. Jake's dad, the drummer, Jake Evans, his dad played for Ray Charles, and Alex Deering, our bass player's dad, Wes, is a violist for the Seattle Symphony.
All right. Spanish Ballroom's a cool little space.
It is.
You have a new album coming out. At the time we're recording this, the album's not released.
That's right.
Depending on when people listen to it, it may already be out. So this might be old news, but it's not old news today. Tell us about the album. Give me, where did the inspiration for the songs come from? How was the recording experience? Let's talk about all that, the back behind the album stuff.
So
first.
I suspect, like a lot of people, COVID forced me to slow down, and really was an engine to lead me to a lot of introspection, reflection, self-reflection, community reflection, thinking about where I've been, where I hope to go, those sorts of things. And at the end of the day, Janus, which is named for, the god or goddess of transitions, doors opening, closing,
so
chapters ending.
Not Janis Joplin.
Janus.
I know.
But I happily accept Janis Joplin as a muse. That's where my headspace was in writing this music. And so the album is really its themes cover ancestry, episodes of a past life. There are songs that touch upon a hopeful future. And, it is likely the most personal and emotional album, but it's not all sad stuff. I mean, there are some really, tongue-in-cheek kind of in the realm of Goo Goo Dolls songs on this album too. There's one called "Where's My Scarf," which is our Soulgrass Americana take on COVID and the life we've had to lead in these times. But that's sort of the impetus to it. And, some of these, a couple of the songs touch upon, in fact, 3 of them touch upon childhood moments. The opening song is called Ponies, and it's one of those tongue-in-cheek songs in the sense that when I was a kid, before we moved to Europe, my parents bought these. Well, actually, they thought they were buying one pony. They didn't realize the pony was pregnant. And before we knew it, we had 2 ponies. They had nothing. They knew nothing about. And so the song, the opening chorus is, "Why we got these ponies, Ma? Why we got these ponies?" We don't know a damn thing about them. Why we got these ponies, right? Another song, touches upon it's wistful and thinking back on not childhood per se, but high school. And, a friend I knew in high school and then had lost touch with. And, so there's songs like that on it. One song is the true story of my ancestor, King Brewster. We collaborated with Dom Flemons, formerly of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and he's won a couple Grammys. We're so honored. The song spoke to him, and he wanted to be part of it. But there are themes of love on it, and it, I think apropos for what this album is, the last song on it is also kind of tongue in cheek, and it's called "Don't Let the Clowns Break You Down." And there are a lot of clowns, Scott.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. Okay. When will this album be released?
Well, King Brewster the single King Brewster is already released, and people can find that on, Apple Music, Spotify, anywhere, YouTube. This Friday, so, I don't know when you will release, but on February 25th, I believe, our second single from this album is releasing, Motel 6 Serenade. And we will have a third single release in late March, likely Ponies, before the album itself releases on April 1.
Okay. And looks like you're going out on the road. Yes. You found some venues where you can play in front of people.
Absolutely.
Why don't we talk about that for a second? It looks like you're starting. We've got a show later this week. Unfortunately, there's the lag time of when we talk, but you have a show on February 23rd.
That's right.
Just to remind you that you have to be performing that night. But then in March, you're starting off in California.
We sure are. And we have not been in the Bay Area, played any shows in the Bay Area since fall of 2019. And we've always had such wonderful, meaningful, enthusiastic shows in the Bay Area. And so it is quite wonderful for us that, the first tour for this band since COVID became a thing will be returning to the Bay Area. We have 3 shows in mid-March. Sweetwater Music Hall, which, speaking of the Grateful Dead, a number of the Dead, Bob Weir and others, have been involved in, Sweetwater Music Hall. So it's got great bones, and hopefully, we will, feel it and channel some of that when we perform. We're going to return to Redwood City in Silicon Valley. And also, we're also going to Santa Cruz, and this will be the first time we've played Santa Cruz. So very excited about that.
I'm scrolling here like this, nobody can know this but you, because you're looking at me. Why is he looking down? So I'm looking at my iPad in front of me here. And what I'm noticing is a theme of coffee shops, though. You play a lot of coffee shops, which I applaud you for, because, well, the byline here on your website is Seattle-Brewed Soulgrass.
Yes.
We're going to go in 2 directions with that. How did that tagline come to be?
Yeah. So, in, the early years of the band, there was, I had a desire to pay homage some way to Starbucks without saying Starbucks. And so I figured, Seattle Brewed was a good way to accomplish that goal. And then Soulgrass was, it's interesting. I was using a lot of words to try to describe what we were doing, because none of the genres one typically hears about really fit what we were doing. It's not really jazz. It's not really folk. It's influenced by those things. It's certainly, we're using bluegrass instruments, et cetera, et cetera. One day I was literally on a shuttle bus at an airport and struck up this conversation with a woman. And she was like, well, how do you describe your music? And I was using all these words, and, and she said, that sounds like Soulgrass. And I was like, are you in marketing? And
I'm taking that.
She said, yeah, that's what I do for a living. And
oh my gosh, okay.
I just ran with it. I said, okay. That is better than any descriptor I've ever, tried to frame this music in. And so we've been Soulgrass ever since.
I have a couple of questions. I want to respect your time. Actually, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
So question number 1 is the question I must ask all my guests. Where's a great place around you to get coffee?
Well, Scott, of course, there are many
Starbucks
say it. Near where I live, but I have come to, in my post Starbucks years, I've come to really love Pete's, and there's a Pete's not that far from where I live, and it also has a sort of neighborhood communal feel to it that I really enjoy.
So when you go to your local Pete's, what are you typically ordering?
Oh, I'm typically a drip person. So, I'm not ordering, the Pete's version of a cappuccino, of a frappuccino or whatever. That's just not me. I love their French press, and that, I tend to, I gravitate toward the darker beans, coming from, Indonesia or Africa, those tend to resonate more with me.
So I'm going to ask, before we hit record, I asked you if you drank coffee, and you said yes, and I'm drinking, and you said something I've never heard anybody say before. You said you were drinking a blend of Pete's and Starbucks.
Yeah.
So what's in your cup right now?
Yeah.
What is this blend?
Yeah. So here's the thing. The whole bean that I ground is Starbucks French roast.
Okay.
But then I add grounded Pete's Major Dickerson. So the ultimate result is a blend of Starbucks and Pete's.
So approximately, what's the ratio here? Is it 1-to-1 or?
It's pretty 50-50 actually.
So how did you come up with this? I'm actually, I have never talked to anybody who's acknowledged blending coffees. This is cool.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
because I like both. I like Starbucks French, and I like the Major Dickinson blend.
Yeah.
So where was the inspiration for this? Was it ponies?
It must be ponies, right?
I don't know. But in all seriousness, what inspired you to take this coffee and create your own blend, if you will?
How does the saying go? Need is the mother of invention, or something like that.
Yeah. Right.
And to be perfectly honest, I'm pretty sure it arose from me being low on something and saying, okay, what's around, right?
Right.
And, and so I'm putting this stuff together, and then the end result was something I really enjoyed, right? And so I was like, okay.
Okay.
This is my new coffee jam, right?
I'm kind of liking this, to be honest with you. I think I'm gonna experiment with that. That's I like that, and I'm with you. It's not often. Every now and then, what's left in the grinder, if I've overground something, but it's the end of the bag, and then I'm like taking the next thing. I'm like, well, I hope this works. I haven't had success very often, unfortunately, but because I try a lot of. I every time I go to a coffee shop that has their own coffee, I'm buying something from them. So I've got, stuff from independent little roasters across the state. And there's some amazing coffee in Washington State.
Yes, there is.
The other question I didn't ask you, and I asked you where your favorite place to perform and to see music is. And I'll let you, no, I'm going to make you stay Washington. Where would you like to play that you haven't played?
That's a really great question. And here's my answer. I would love to play at Fremont Abbey.
Okay.
Upstairs.
Okay.
And we've played in the basement of Fremont Abbey, but there's something incredibly magical about the upstairs of Fremont Abbey. They have it's a repurposed church, and there is something incredibly intimate about that performance space. It too has amazing acoustics, and I love what Fremont Abbey stands for. It is, a champion of great acoustic music, and it's branched out such that their shows also take place at St. Mark's and a few St. Mark's Cathedral and a few other places, but that upstairs space, and I don't think it holds more than 200 people, so I guess my bottom line is, Scott, it would be cool to play it, and if we were ever invited to some of these huge festivals, of course, that would be just amazing, to play the Gorge. Oh my God. I mean, that would be, such a statement. But if you're talking about an ideal venue for the listener to appreciate what we've done, the musicianship, the lyricism, the really the ambiance of the music, and for us to feel the audience, because that's one of the best things about this whole thing for me, is when that electric connection happens from the stage to the audience. And you asked me earlier why coffee houses. That almost always happens in a coffee house setting.
I love seeing music in a small, intimate coffee house setting. So I just last week I was writing our weekly newsletter, and right as I was writing it, emails came in. I looked, and Paul McCartney's playing in Spokane. Oh, I think I'd like to see Paul McCartney. And he's opening his national tour in Spokane. That's the first night, and then 2 nights in Seattle. And I'm like, I think I'd rather drive to Spokane than to Seattle. It's just, it's about, we're right in the middle. So it's like, we'll go to Spokane. Yeah. And I'm thinking, it's going to be a hockey rink, and nothing against hockey, but can you imagine seeing Paul McCartney play in a coffee house? Can you imagine? You know what I mean? Just how
there's nothing like it. I mean, for me, the closest thing I've had to that was I had the great fortune of seeing Bruce Springsteen when he was on Broadway in this, 700 person venue.
Okay.
And the intimacy of that moment, I will always take with me, because it was just, I feel, his lyricism, his musicianship, his storytelling ability just all came, to a head in that, in that way. And we as an audience, there was an electricity between Springsteen and I'm sure every single one of us, who had the good fortune of being in that space with him.
That'd been amazing to see.
And if I could see Paul McCartney that way, particularly after watching the documentary Get Back, I feel, I don't know if you've seen that, Scott.
I did. I watched it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It opened my mind to who the Beatles were in ways that I just never imagined, and to him as an incredibly, once in a lifetime, really gifted musician and lyricist.
Yeah, I had two quick observations about watching that. Well, number one was I applaud him because the show didn't put him in the best light.
Yeah.
That he was comfortable enough, think that he and Ringo were the producers of this, that they had we'll say they could cut out things that weren't flattering, but that didn't put Paul in a particularly flattering light all the time.
That's right.
In my opinion. He was kind of
he was bossy. He he was dismissive of George Harrison, and you could understand the creative tension because Harrison wants to be heard, and McCartney isn't listening to him.
Right. Then the other takeaway is they were working on Get Back. Mm-hmm. Something that, I've heard for, well, how old is that song? 50 years? No?
Yeah.
50, right. And, it's a staple of FM radio and
total,
everybody knows Get Back, right? Could you imagine being in London when they're playing on the rooftop and hearing that song for the first time, not knowing it's going to be a global phenomenon, but like, well, I don't know if I like this song. I'm not sure what to think. I was watching this going, do they have any clue what that was going to be?
Yeah.
And it was just, anyway, it's just, I need to respect your time, and I could keep talking to you for quite some time, but I'll use my standard line. I say this every show, but what didn't I ask you that I should have? What didn't we cover that we should have covered?
Let me think.
Your closing arguments.
Yeah, let me think about that. I think the only thing we didn't, explicitly cover that, I want to put out there is, I actually think our best days are yet to come as Paula Boggs band and me as an artist. I have learned so much about myself and my art in these past couple years, during these COVID times. And I'm really quite hopeful, not just about our music, but the hope in our music is a byproduct of the hope I feel about our future. We get a lot of negative feedback about who we are and how we get along and all of those things, and doom to the United States and whatnot. And I don't buy into it. I think when I look at not just the music community, but my community writ large, I see a lot of people caring for each other and looking out for each other and, just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And that's the America I want to be part of. I want our music to be informed by that. And I don't think it's a fairy tale, Scott. So I want to leave your listeners with that.
Okay. Thank you. That's wonderful. But we're not going to leave with that, because you're going to tell them where they can find your music and find out more about you. That'll be closing notes. And we'll put these in our show notes too. But where can people find out more about you, find out more about your band, listen to your music?
Yes, I would happily and aggressively urge your listeners to check out paulaboggsband.net. We're all over social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. The list is long. YouTube. We're on all those platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, of course. And so please check us out. Listen to our music if you like it. Please comment on it and follow us.
There we go. Paula, thank you so much for taking the time today to be here. I've enjoyed a lot this has been wonderful. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks to your listeners.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.